Well, joining me now is National MP Keith Pitt. Keith, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's start with the DJ Albo new album drop. As we said, it's been titled So Helpful. What's your reaction to his new CD of sorts?
Well, whether it's pride parties at the US Embassy or this type of nonsense, it just demonstrates how much this Prime Minister and this federal Labor government are disconnected from the everyday Australian and how tough they're doing it. But I was really surprised he left off his two favourite tracks. He left off It's the Coalition's Fault and I Blame Peter Dutton as the other two. You usually see that they have a performance at every single doorstop and every time he talks to the press, but they weren't there. If you want to know what the Australian people think, have a look at the comments and they are scathing.
And they are rightly scathing too. As I said, it's a tone-deaf post, inappropriate in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And Keith, I asked earlier how many Labor MPs does it take to understand how the economy works. Not one of them can understand that big spending equals pressure on inflation. They've been warned. Why do you think Labor is so desperately trying to deny the RBA's warnings?
Well, you've got a treasurer that denies how economics works. He wrote a 6,000-word treatise on how he's going to remake capitalism. He doesn't listen to any of the major economists in Australia who are all saying the same thing. The RBA governor was super clear in her comments yesterday. The policies of this Labor government are driving inflation. Australia has an inflation problem that is pushing up the cost of living. It's not a wages problem or an underpayment problem or wages are too low. It's that living costs are simply outstripping what people are earning. And that is a real problem for every single Australian, and you cannot make that up simply by picking one of your favourite industries and giving them taxpayer money in terms of wage increases.
Well, let's talk about childcare because Anthony Albanese today announced a 15% pay rise for childcare workers. It's going to be funded by taxpayers. Now, Keith, I'm not saying that they should not get a pay rise because I think that they are deserving. But my concern is that it's going to set now a precedent for other industries to want to follow suit. But what's your take? Is this good or bad policy?
Oh, I completely understand why they're struggling. It is lower paid. Everyone wants to earn more money. I don't know anyone that doesn't. But what about everyone else? What about the hairdressers and the people who are operating the checkouts at the local supermarket and all the individuals who are working in parks and gardens and everything else which doesn't usually attract a very large wage? Where is their 15% subsidy from the taxpayer? Why don't they get a go? And the answer across the board is really, really simple. The Labor government needs to focus on living costs because if you get those down, then that helps everybody, not just one group or one group of individuals who they think might help them somewhere in an election. It is a nonsense decision. I just think it's madness. Where does this end? Does everyone end up working for the public service? What about the poor organisations who have to sign up to this and then get a massive increase in their rent or a massive increase in taxes at a state level, whether it's land tax or others, and then they can't afford to pay their bills and they fall over? This is why government should stay out of these organisations and just let them operate.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Now, look, let's turn to renewables because Albo has backed a dud. The Australian is reporting that a solar panel manufacturer backed by Mike Cannon-Brookes and former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is preparing to cut up to 35 jobs in a possible setback to Albo's renewable manufacturing plans. Keith, SunDrive Solar this year signed a deal to establish a solar manufacturing facility, of course, at the former Liddell coal-fired power station as part of that federal Sunshot program. What does this mean, do you think, now for Labor's renewables dream?
It means the solar sunshot's misfired. That's what it means. Because like every single commentator that said at the time, how do you compete with China, who does not have all of these crazy green policies, who do not have the overheads of the environmental regulations and everything else, and unionised workforces and all the things that we want and hope to have in Australia, but they just simply can't compete. You're competing with two hands tied behind your back, and even a massive injection of money from the Labor government clearly hasn't made the difference, because if you are firing staff, that generally indicates you've got a real problem. And it is a complete misfire. It is a missed shot. It is a missed opportunity. And everyone who knew anything about manufacturing said it wouldn't work, and it looks like it won't.
No, and it's no wonder that a number of companies are now ditching their green dreams themselves because they have realised that they can't do it, and no wonder they're also cutting staff. Now, before we let you go, the Queensland Premier's socialist-era pipe dream to intervene in service stations is facing a roadblock already. It's been revealed at least 50 independent fuel retailers would need to set up shop in southeast Queensland for miles to achieve this election promise of cutting fuel prices by actually intervening in the market. Keith, how ridiculous, seriously, is this plan?
Well, which family-owned business, which independent station, which independent provider does the Miles government think they're going to put out of business? What's the work from home roster, do you think, Danica, on the public service operator service station? That might be quite challenging. But this from a Premier who can't run the health system, can't fix ambulance ramping, can't sort out youth crime, can't do all the things that state governments could do, but somehow they're going to run a commercial service station that will drive down fuel prices in a couple of key locations. And guess what? They'll be marginal seats and it won't make any difference whatsoever because the Miles government stinks. They can't do what they're employed to do, and they should get out of the way and let David Crisafulli get on with fixing it.
Well, there's only a few months to go to see what happens in those stakes. Keith Pitt, always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining me this evening.